kept rising at double-digit rates, they really didn't care. They thought even if the person defaults, we'll just seize the property, which is rising anyway. The only reason this persisted was because you had this crazy mentality where home prices are going to keep going up, and that, I think, was fueled by the Federal Reserve.
President Obama says what happened was because of a culture of irresponsibility and greed. You buy that?
Well, certainly those things are all involved. If people weren't greedy, it wouldn't have happened. But people have always been greedy, so it seems like an odd thing to say blame it on greed. How come people, weren't investment bankers on Wall Street greedy in the 1990s? Of course they were.
Yes,
so the question is, what exactly changed? And again, I think one of the big things was the unprecedented easy money policies of the Federal Reserve.
He is coming out, being President Obama is coming out now with a financial the package of financial regulations and rules and so on, kind of to prevent this from happening again. But in your mind, can you see this repeating in the next 10 years?
I think there'll be some sort of repetition. I don't think it'll be another boom in housing because people learn their lesson.
No, repetition in the kind of crisis we are going through right now.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Because, look, after the dot-com crash, everyone was slapping their heads saying, I can't believe how silly we were that we were paying millions of dollars for these companies that were just internet stocks that hadn't even earned a dollar in profit.
Right.
And then when Enron, that whole fiasco happened in the early 2000s, all the regulators said, we're going to crack down. We got to be more serious. And they passed Sarbanes-Oxley and all those. The SEC's budget was greatly increased under George Bush.
Right.
And so we see that they obviously didn't fix things. So I think now, again, we're going to get all this window dressing and all these promises, and that 5 years from now there's going to be another crisis. They're going to blame on greedy private people, and then the government's going to want more power and money.
What is the solution?
I think the solution is to go the opposite route of what we've been doing. The government should just get out of the affairs, because the worst thing is if the government deregulates, let business do what they want, but then promises them we'll bail you out if you screw up. That if you do well, your private shareholders get the profits, but if it blows up in your face, the taxpayer eats the loss. So I think they need to end the bailout mentality and let the profit and loss system return. So people know if they start a business and they do well, they keep the money, but if they don't do well, they go out of business.
Now, can the marketplace really be the kind of arbitration mechanism that rewards sense, good judgment, wise decision, and punishes bad judgment? And so can it really be that?
I think it can be. I think most people think, generally speaking, that outright socialism isn't a good idea and that more of a free market capitalist system performs better, and then they just differ as to how far do you push it. And I think that we see historically when the government tries to fix particular areas, it usually makes them end up worse. And so, at virtually any area that the government touches, usually people end up thinking there's corruption involved and overspending and so on. So I think, generally speaking, the free market is a better approach.
But Dr. Murphy, it looks like the world is moving more socialist. Does that concern you? Great Britain and France and Miss Merkel in Germany, all of them are throwing money after these, what you might call failing institutions, failing industries. They're very concerned about collapses of their economies, a loss of investor confidence, da-da-da-da-da. Of course, Mr. Bernanke himself is concerned about rising deficits as contributing to loss of investor confidence. But yet the world seems to be throwing money after industry and trying to prop up failing companies and so on. You think that the entire world seems to be getting this wrong?
Well, I think a lot of what's happening is the U.S. is urging all of the major governments to follow its suit. I mean, Merkel and others have publicly said that they think the U.S. is going too far. So, ironically, you have places like the U.S. going more towards socialism. You have formerly communist countries going more towards capitalism. And China, of course, is much more liberal now than it was 20 years ago.
Absolutely.
So, I don't know on net how the whole world is going, but certainly many of the formerly so-called capitalist countries are going the other way.
Who's going to come out of this smelling like a rose, as far as you're concerned, in terms of country-wise? Which countries will China continue after this to get back up on its feet and do almost double-digit economic growth, or certainly in the high single digits? With India, do you see that the Brazils and the Russia and so on will be coming forth? Countries that normally were not the leaders economically and all that, but kind of now assuming a more world leadership role.
Yeah, I definitely think if I had to pick a region of the world, I guess I would look at the Asian countries, and China in particular, as where I think the economic power is going to shift over the next 50 years, let's say. Mm-hmm. That I think definitely the U.S. and Great Britain will not be the economic powerhouses that they are today 20, 30 years from now.
Is that because of a greater sense of innovation or because of deprivation through whatever? I mean, lack of education or, political philosophies of the past, Mao Zedong and so on and so forth. And people having been deprived for so long and have looked at their older brothers, bigger brothers, United States and so on, and determined, I'm not going to make that mistake, and let's be more nimble, let's be more agile, let's be more innovative and creative and so on, that these are the ones who are going to take over the world. Is it that, or is it simply because the U.S. and those are going to fall so flat on their faces that a leadership will need to emerge?
Well, the reason for my prediction has to do with those trends we just discussed, that I think, since I do believe that the free market is the way to go in terms of promoting prosperity and economic growth, China's liberalizing, because it's starting out at a much more regulatory place.
Right.
And so they start liberalizing, and they've got 1 billion people. If you basically unleash a billion potential entrepreneurs, there's a huge amount of production there that's pent up waiting to be freed, whereas the United States is going the other way. So I think U.S. growth is going to be much more lackluster because Washington's taking over big segments of the economy, whereas the Chinese government, authoritarian though they are, I think, seeing the light and realizing if we loosen up a little bit, our people can produce a lot more.
Mr. Obama says, I'm not in this business now. Please don't think that I'm in the auto business and I'm not interested in being in the bank business. Citicorp and the rest of you guys, get your act together. I am leaving you alone in a very short while. Will the government ever be able to extricate itself away from what it has now gotten itself into?
I don't think so. I mean, history is full, of course, of promises of temporary emergency measures that are still there 50 years later. So, no, I mean, I think in a sense it's like welfare dependency, that these big banks now, they're absolutely dependent on handouts from the government. The Federal Reserve has these continuing to roll over loans and so forth, and that the banks could quite plausibly say to them, you can't cut us off now or else we'll fold, and no government's going to want to do that. Whether it's, Obama's not going to be able to do it because I think the economy's not going to too much under his watch, and then his successor is going to be in the same position. The idea will be, well, gee, we've already pumped in hundreds of billions. We don't want to let them fail now.
Right. Dr. Murphy, talk a little bit about this. The Bahamas is, of course, following the suit of the United States of America. We, too, have borrowed money to shore up our own economy and to do some stimulus in our economy because we wanted to save jobs and put people to work who had lost jobs. And so we did some public service projects and cleaned up the island, and we are borrowing money to build roads, and we're going to cause the airport to be improved. We are doing essentially the same thing as the United States has done. And the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has called it a good thing. You don't obviously agree with them.
Well, no, I don't. The IMF, I don't think, has a particularly good track record advising smaller countries. I mean, again, if you look at some of these places, they very much regret what happened when the IMF comes in and tells them what to do, and they follow the advice, and then they end up, being economic basket cases. So I'm very suspicious of the IMF's recommendations. I think the Bahamas, to your credit, from my point of view, I don't think you've gone as far out of down this path as the United States has, even as a share of your economy. I don't think it's been as aggressive, and actually a lot of your tax system, I think, is much better in many respects than the U.S. approach. That I think here, that you have more of an emphasis on savings and investment, that people aren't penalized as much with the tax code if they plow money back into their businesses.
Yeah. No, in our system, of course, we are very concerned, however, about our debt. In our system, we are extremely concerned about people being out of jobs, because for us, it translates into social dislocation, which gives rise to other social issues, particularly crime. In the United States, not necessarily, although some of that, of course, obtains. Do we have a different set of problems, challenges, considerations, maybe, that we cannot, therefore, look, say, to the American model or the British model or the European model, and therefore have to come up ourselves with different and more creative ways of responding than, say, the United States?
Well, I think I understand what you're saying, that if you had massive unemployment of 25% or something, that might be pose particular problems here, and that if you thought of